else media.
The following episode will contain the names of people and places set in the fictional world of the Hyborian Age. Furthermore, if I am unable to find these names spoken aloud on YouTube or in an audiobook, they are names that I will certainly pronounce incorrectly in almost every single instance. Listener discretion is advised.
Between the years when the oceans drank Atlantis and the rise of the sons of Ares, there was an age undreamed of, when shining kingdoms lay spread across the world. Hither came Conan, the Cimmerian, sword in hand. It is I, his chronicler, who knows well his saga. Now let me tell you of the days of high adventure.
From Steeven or Else Media, this is Hither Came Conan, the podcast that's traveling through the wilds of Hyboria, bare-chested. A sheen of sweat glistening on his chiseled pecs and rock-hard abs. His bulbous biceps quivering with an almost impish delight. His glorious glutes bouncing atop the saddle in rhythm to the plodding churn of the horse's mighty hooves. So I seem to have lost myself for a moment there, not quite sure what came over me, but let me just take a moment to collect myself and we will get back to the episode. If you'll just bear with me.
Keep it together. Keep it together, keep it together, keep it together, keep it together, keep it together.
I'm your host, my name is Steeven, and unlike our big, brawny, butch barbarian, I would never be caught out in public without a shirt on. I'm a ginger, a red-headed orangutan of a man with a beard.
A great big bushy beard.
And due to this fact, I don't really tan. Instead, get me out under the hot sun and I burn like a vampire at a beach party. Why a vampire would be at a beach party is beyond me. I can only assume that they were invited and they didn't want to be rude. They figured that they would just make a quick appearance. In and out, easy peasy. But once they arrived, they just couldn't find the right time to duck out without, again, coming off as rude. I guess the vampire in this scenario is a bit overly concerned with appearances. They're a people pleaser, an approval seeker, and one who is very insecure. Anyway, yeah, that's why you would never catch me outside without a shirt on. I mean, at my age, and as someone who has been burned by the sun a number of times in my youth, a bad sunburn nowadays could easily lead to melanoma.
Buck melanoma, that's what they call me. Or melanoma head, they'll call me that. Melanoma head's coming.
Plus I got this condition that, well, I guess some doctors would call me morbidly obese, but yikes, right? That is a horribly terrifying classification that sounds way too final, but, well, yeah, that's what I got. And frankly, I am super embarrassed by my plentiful paunch, so...
My God, are you still talking?
Once again, I kind of lost my train of thought there. What were we talking about?
Conan the Barbarian here.
Oh yeah, today we're looking at Conan the Barbarian number 27. This issue sports a cover date of June 1973, though it hit the stands in March. It sold for just 20 cents, and it is entitled The Blood of Bel-Hissar. It was written by Roy Thomas, with pencils by John Buscema, inks by Ernie Chan, the letters were by John Costanza, and Glennis Ween was the colorist.
Into the boat!
Previously on Hither Came Conan. As the War of the Tarim comes to an end, the titular barbarian escapes the city of Makkalet and heads south. Prince Yezdegerd, however, despite winning the war and recovering the living Tarim, sort of, still yearns for Conan's head, which he hopes to one day mount on a great big spike. Probably. As our story begins, Conan is traveling west in the empty Hyrkanian plains south of the Zaporoska River. He's alone, but for his horse and the croak of the waiting buzzards, when he hears the sound of stark terror coming in the form of a woman's scream. Riding at once toward the sound, he finds a giant, barrel-shaped, fur-clad man of Khitai assaulting a half-naked Khitai woman. Conan leaps from the saddle, tackling the large assailant and pulling him from atop the woman, and soon the two warriors face each other, swords drawn. They tussle for a bit, but it's not long before their skirmish is interrupted by the approach of a small group of horsemen, outriders from the army of Yezdegerd, Prince of Turin. Conan jumps into the saddle, grabs up the woman, and flees, his former sparring partner following closely behind as the Turanians give chase. Soon they arrive at the fortress of Bab-El-Shaithan, where a gate opens to let them in, slamming shut just in time to block the pursuing Turanian riders. Inside, they are greeted by a horde of armed men. Realizing that they are outnumbered, Conan wisely surrenders. Conan and his two companions learn that the fortress is a haven for outcasts and bandits, ruled by the outlaw Skol Abdhur, and that the bandits are divided into two factions: the Hyrkanian bandits led by Kai Shah, and the non-Hyrkanian bandits led by Qadra Mahmed. Finding a woman in their midst, the bandits turn into a pack of horny animals, and soon a fight breaks out between Conan and a giant bald Hyperborean. A scuffle that Skol Abdhur ends quickly by stabbing the Hyperborean in the back.
I have been stabbed in the back!
Abdhur, friendly with Conan, explains that he keeps the men in check with a ruby called the Blood of Bel-Hissar. Anyone who slays him and takes the ruby would become a target, so the outlaws let Abdhur play them against each other. Later that night, after much drinking and feasting, Conan retires to his room with the Khitai woman, whose name, it turns out, is Suan. The Cimmerian is hoping to get a little something-something going with his new roommate, and so the barbarian makes his intentions known.
Hey, maybe, how about sex?
Before he can do more than kiss her, however, Conan suddenly passes out, drugged by Suan. When he wakes sometime later, Conan finds that Skol Abdhur, along with his bodyguards, are all dead, and the ruby, the Blood of Bel-Hissar, is missing. Conan then leads a group of outlaws in search of the culprit, when deep in the bowels of the fortress, they find Suan, who accuses the Cimmerian of being the thief. And of course, a brawl breaks out. Conan kills a few dudes and attempts to flee, when suddenly he is pulled into a hidden passageway by Turgol, the colossal Khitan who leads our hero outside the fortress, where the two make their escape. Turgol, who is mute by the way, reveals to the Cimmerian that he has the Blood of Bel-Hissar, and Conan discovers that Suan is Turgol's wife, who, it seems, has betrayed them both. Meanwhile, back in the fortress, the bandits kill Suan before fighting amongst themselves, a scuffle that quickly turns deadly. Outside the fortress, Conan contemplates wrestling Turgol to the ground and stealing the ruby for himself, but then changes his mind. He decides that it's just not worth the bother and leaves Turgol, telling the mute that before they met, the Cimmerian had been headed for Argos and the Western Sea. And so, as the issue ends, Conan gets back to it. All right, so like we did with the previous issue, we're just going to go through page by page and see what we see, and I'll tell you how I feel about the stuff that I see within the issue. We'll start with the cover. The cover is basically all earth tones, green and brown and red, and it features Skol Abdhur front and center, basically his head, and he's holding up the ruby, the Blood of Bel-Hissar, and we can see inside the ruby Conan and Suan. It's all right. It's an okay cover. It doesn't really do a lot for me, but you know, this is, I guess, a time where the covers were just kind of churned out. You know, I think nowadays the publishers, you know, if the artist on the book doesn't create the cover themselves, they reach out to somebody else to do it. And there are a number of artists out there that probably make a pretty good living just doing covers. And because that is mostly all they do, they can spend a lot of time crafting a very good looking cover that will not look anything like what's inside the book. Whereas this cover, while it doesn't technically accurately depict what's happening in the book, in a metaphorical sense, it does. You're not looking at this cover and, I mean, you're not going to look at this cover and go into the comic and by the end of it, you're going to go, wait a minute, Conan and that girl were never inside the Blood of Bel-Hissar. They were never in that freaking ruby. They lied to us on the cover, man. I'm going to sue Marvel Comics. I don't think anybody was doing that. But, I mean, it's a nice looking cover. I'm just not a fan of the colors, really. The whole color palette here, it's very just kind of dull with the green and the browns and the red hues. Just not a big fan. Getting into the issue, we start out with the splash page that tells us that, well, it gives us the credits, of course, right at the very top. The writer, editor, Roy Thomas, the artist, John Buscema, and it lists the inker as Ernie Chua. Now, when I went through the credits at the top of the episode, I said that the inker was Ernie Chan. If you remember, I don't know why I said it like that. If you remember, I was going to sing In the Air Tonight or whatever it's called by frickin' Phil Collins. Doom, 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 doom. You know that song. I couldn't think of all the lyrics except for, if you remember something to worry. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, in the previous episode, when we talked about the previous issue number 27, I talked about how Ernie Chua and Ernie Chan they're the same person. His name was incorrect on his birth certificate or something, and he was not able to change it to his correct name, Chan, until he became an American citizen. So just know that going forward, I will be calling him Ernie Chan because that's the name he is most known for. But with the splash page here, we have Conan, bare-chested, sinewy thews, so steely that they could have been forged in Pittsburgh. He's sitting astride a black stallion that's rearing back. They're in kind of a desert scrubland. It says that they are south of the Zaporoska River, which I had to say over and over and over in my head and out loud before I could say Zaporoska without my bowels clenching up. And even then, I don't know that I've said it correctly, but Conan's out there in this scrubland and he is halting. He's stopping. Something has stopped him. We also learn here that this is a story that was freely adapted from the story The Blood of Bel-Shazzar by Robert E. Howard. And it is not a Conan story, but it's a story set during the time of the Crusades, starring one of Robert E. Howard's characters, Cormac Fitzgeoffrey, who also showed up in the story Hawks of Outremer. But yeah, it's not a Conan story, so I didn't read it. I basically did just as much research to tell you what I've already told you. I mean, I can tell you that it was first, or it was written in 1931 and also published in 1931 in a magazine with a very cringy title, Oriental Stories.
Offense taken!
Back to the comic. The thing that made Conan stop is he heard a woman scream, so he goes charging out, to find her because Conan can't hear a woman scream and not do something about it because that's just the way he is. And he finds this great big dude, this big wall of a man who is from Kitai, which is basically it's a country far to the east. And because Hyboria is supposed to be our world, but set way, way in the past, this Kitai are the people that would later become known as Asians. They're in the Asian area of the world. That didn't come out very smoothly, did it?
Offense taken.
Anyway, Kitai, they're Asians, and there's this big hulking wall of a man who seems to be getting ready to do some very nasty things to a woman who is also a Kitai. Conan just rides right up to him, leaps from atop his horse, tackles the man, pulls him to the ground, yelling, "Filthy pig!" And then he just basically kind of half crouches, half kneels over the guy and just starts wailing on him, just pounding his fists into the guy's face. And the whole time he's yelling at him, "In Cimmeria, we treat our hunting hounds better than you Easterners treat your women." Conan points out that the guy has nothing to say as Conan is beating him in the face. And he also makes it known that maybe this fella might talk a bit if he knocks out a few of his teeth.
I'll knock your teeth down your throat and out your butt, you little bastard.
Conan's starting to get a little cocky when suddenly the guy's hand shoots up and grabs one of Conan's wrists, and the dude throws Conan off of him. And then the guy gets up and pulls a sword. He's got this very wide, short sword. It's really weird looking. It's like Buscema decided, all right, well, here's this kind of barrel-shaped guy. He's wide. He's thick. I should give him a sword that proportionately fits his body type, which is short and wide. It's I don't know. It's kind of weird. I almost expect this to be an action figure. It just feels very action figure-y for some reason. I don't know why, but Conan, of course, draws his sword. And then Conan's kind of pumped about this battle. And the reason he's kind of pumped about it is because his opponent has remained silent the entire time. And for Conan, according to this issue, that's the way his people prefer to fight. You know, he comes into these civilized lands, and when he starts crossing swords with people, they're always shouting at him and threatening him and screaming out war cries and boasting and all that crap. But in Cimmeria, they just get down to the business of killing each other with swords. There's no need for words. And so Conan feels right at home fighting this guy, and they commence to swinging swords. There's a couple of panels here where they are crossing swords, and John Buscema has, I don't know, pieces of something just flying off. Like, I don't know what these are supposed to be. I don't know if, at first I thought Conan shattered the dude's sword, but that's not the case. So I don't know if this is just crap from the ground, because they're creating a cloud. They're standing in I don't think it's sand at this point. I think it's more of a prairie, hard pan type of situation that they're in here. So it's kind of a dirt, dust covered ground, dry, very arid. And as they're fighting, they have created a dust cloud around them. So I don't know if this is also supposed to be just shit from the ground that's flying up because they're fighting so fiercely. But the woman interrupts them, yells at them, tells them to stop, to cease their struggles, and calls them a pair of addled fools, because she points out there's a group of riders speeding toward them. And she points out to Conan and his opponent that the riders appear to be part of the army of Prince Yezdegerd of Turan. And she tells them that they need to flee, otherwise they're going to die. And Conan leaps up onto his horse, starts to ride away, and as he's doing so, he leans over and grabs her up, throws her across the saddle with him. He immediately regrets that decision because the riders of Turan are catching up to them, and he can only surmise that it's because with this woman now on the horse with him, it's added weight, and his horse is not able to run as fast. The big wide Khitan, and I try not to point out when I'm worried that I am mispronouncing something. That's why I put the little warning at the beginning of the show. But I didn't spend a lot of time trying to find how you pronounce the word Khitai. But I have an audiobook. The word Khitai, the name Khitai shows up in the audiobook, and that's how that dude pronounced it. But Khitan, or kitten, as I came across on YouTube, that it would be a person of Khitai. I'm fairly certain I'm pronouncing it correctly based on the fact that the other dude pronounced the word Khitai. I did look it up on YouTube, but all I could find was a video with a robot voice saying kitten. And I doubt that kitten is the correct word. I think it's Khitan. Anyway, the big wide wall of a man from Khitai who was Conan's opponent is on his horse. He's following Conan. And before the riders can catch up to them, they suddenly cross like a hill. They come over the top of a hill, and boom, there's this big castle in their path. And as they're riding toward it, the doors of the castle open. Conan and the Khitan ride through. The Turanians continue to give chase, but one of them calls a halt. He tells the rest of his companions, "Hold, swine! Know you not where we have come? And one of his other, fellow soldiers is like, whatever, man. We are the troops of Prince Yezdegerd. Ain't nobody gonna do nothing to us. He is quickly proven wrong, however, when arrows rain down from the top of the walls, killing a couple of them, and they ride away. Inside this fortress, which we find out is Bab-El-Shaithan, which apparently means the gate of the devil. They go into an eating hall. They're met in the courtyard by a big group of unruly looking men holding axes and spears and such. And some of them are actually, or at least one guy's holding a sword above his head. Like he's going, let's get him. Let's kill him all. Yes. And Conan's ready to fight. Conan's starting to draw his sword. He's ready to throw down. He learns that the name of the dude he was fighting is Turgol. And so he shouts over to the guy that if he wants to live, he better draw his sword too. This is their fight. Their fight together. Turgol draws his sword and throws it to the ground in surrender. And so Conan's like, well, shit. I guess I gotta do the same thing. So he drops his sword. And all these unruly and unclean looking men, I bet they stink. I bet all of them stink. Of course, I bet nobody cared back then. I don't think back then as if it was a real time, but they didn't know what Old Spice was back then. So they didn't know any better. People stank. That's just the way it was. Hither Came Conan will return after these messages. There's nothing in life I love more than coming home after a hard day's work and curling up with a great big stack of comic books. Well, that's not true. I mean, I love my wife. She is my top of the stack. But after her, the second thing I love most in life are comics. Actually, my kids come second. I can't forget about them. So yeah, top 3 things I love most in life, right there at the top would be my wife. The kids fall into that second slot, and then coming in at number 3, comic books. Of course, if you want me to be truly honest, and I think you do, then it goes wife, kids, our cats, and then comics. So yeah, let me try this again. There's only 3 things I love in life more than comic books: my wife, my kids, and the cats. After that, if you set those 3 things aside, then there's nothing in life I love more than coming home after a hard day's work and curling up with a great big stack of comic books. Except maybe talking about them. I mean, I love talking about comics. Okay, so top 5 things I love most in life. The wife, she's at the top, of course. Then the kids, the cats, talking about comics, and then at number 5, comic books. Wait, that doesn't make any sense. Why would talking about comics be above actual comic books? I mean, I can't talk about them if I don't read them, right? Plus, when it comes right down to it, I wouldn't even want to talk about comics if I didn't love them. That makes sense, right? Okay, so there's the wife right there at the very top, then the kids, the cats, then comics, and at number 5 would be talking about comics. So yeah, I come home, hard day's work, curl up with a great big stack of comics, I read them, and then at that point, I want to talk about them. That's really where I'm going with all of this. See, my name is Steeven, and I'm the host of a new podcast called The Comic Book Show, the podcast that's a show about comics. Each season of The Comic Book Show will be dedicated to one storyline, story arc, or mini-series, one issue per episode. And it all starts with The Man of Steel from DC Comics, a 6-issue top-to-bottom reboot of Superman following Crisis on Infinite Earths that ran from July to September all the way back in 1986. Oh, and did I mention that it was both written and drawn by John Byrne? I mean, the guy has his problems, sure. But when it comes to comics in the 80s, the dude was a legend, am I right? So yeah, The Comic Book Show. Season 1 is just the beginning. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check out thecomicbookshowpodcast.com to get started. And now back to Hither Came Conan. Anyway, Conan and Turgol and the woman are taken into like a dining hall where they find just all kinds of dudes. We learn that they're bandits, or as one of them says, the hated outcasts of every land and clime, and they have taken up residence in this fortress. Conan quickly surmises that the bandits, or these men in this dining hall, which apparently at this point must be all of them, or most of them, but they appear to be divided into two different factions. The Hyrkanians, who follow Kai Shah, who was once a noble, yet now hunted outlaw. And then there's the rest, the non-Hyrkanians, who are led by Qadra Mahmed, and the narration describes them as a motley crew of cutthroats and deserters. Conan also points out that there are no women anywhere in the room. There are slaves, but they're all men. Everybody here except for the Kitai woman, who he just learns suddenly here is, her name is Suwan. And he points that out to her. You're the only woman here, so we may want to tread lightly, because this is a big fortress full of dudes, and not just dudes, but outlaws and bandits and cutthroats and deserters. You may be the first woman that they've seen in a while. And so she clings to him. She wraps her arms around his waist, and he just stands there looking all muscly and tough as she clings to him for support because she's afraid. Of course, why wouldn't she be? I'd be frickin' terrified. I'd be pooping my pants. She's not wearing pants, though. She's wearing a little dress thing that barely covers her naughty bits. But as they're kind of standing there watching these men eat, these men who are eating, and watching them watch them.
Say again?
Conan's watching the men who are eating and watching Conan watching the men. Does that make sense?
That doesn't make sense.
But as they're standing there and she's clinging to him, he asks her who was the Khitan dude. Who is that guy? Turgal. What was he doing? Why was he beating on her? And she tells him that she is a slave and Turgal is her owner and her master. And she says,
"He is my owner, my master, and he is cruel beyond all belief. I've served him well, but his depravity knows no bounds."
And that piqued my curiosity. What does that mean? Is this guy a big screaming pervert? Is that what she's saying? Does he have sex with anything that moves, walks or crawls or slithers across the ground?
Just about everything that walks or crawls at one time or another.
Matter of fact, just for the fun of it, just for my own satisfaction, for my own curiosity, let's look up the word depravity. Okay, so according to Merriam-Webster.com, depravity, definition number 1, a corrupt act or practice. Definition number 2, the quality or state of being corrupt, evil, or perverted. The quality or state of being depraved. And they have a little quote here from somebody named Nicholas D. Christoph, who says, "He is awed by his fabulous wealth, but deeply troubled by what he sees as its moral depravity or depravity or however the hell you want to pronounce it. I don't care."
I don't fucking care.
So yeah, to me that means that this dude is a big screaming evil pervert who has probably done some stuff to Suwan that will stick with her for the rest of her life. Turgal, in the meantime, as they're talking about him, is just sitting on a bench in the corner, a shadowy corner, just being silent. Conan, I think, has figured out at this point that the guy is a mute. But that's when this big, tall Hyperborean comes striding over to Conan and Suwan, and he's like, "Give me that girl. She's mine now, buddy." And he's a tall dude. He's a big guy. He's probably a good 1.5 feet, if more, taller than Conan. He's muscly. He's not like overly muscly. He's not like the frickin' Hulk. He's got a very long reach. And he too is shirtless. And he's got these weird pants on with like leather straps going down the legs. But yeah, he comes rolling up to Conan. He calls Conan Longmane, which I've seen often in this comic. Everybody refers to Conan or gives him a nickname based on his long hair, as if they've never encountered anyone in the world in their entire life with long hair. And yet there are people all around in just this room with hair that's just as long as his. But apparently there's just something about Conan's hair that people have to comment on it by giving him nicknames like Longmane, But the guy comes rolling up and says, this girl's with me now. Give her over. And Conan's like, no. Takes a swing at the guy. And again, the guy's really tall and he's got such a long reach that Conan is not able to really do anything before the guy just kind of reaches out and brings a fist down on Conan's back and knocks him to the ground. And then he grabs up the girl and he's about to walk away with her when Conan just leaps on the guy's back, wraps his legs around the guy's waist and puts him in a chokehold. The guy grabs a knife. Conan drops from his back so he doesn't get cut by the knife. And then suddenly the guy has, well, he's got like a small two-headed axe on his belt, half moon blades, kind of like a hatchet. And he grabs it up and he's getting ready to chop Conan to pieces when suddenly he is stabbed from behind. And that is when we meet Skol Abdhur, S-K-O-L, Skol Abdhur. Well, I was going to say like the tobacco, but no, that's S-K-O-A-L, but still Skol. He is the dude that leads this motley group of bandits. And I'm going to read you how he introduces himself to Conan.
My name, Outlander, is Skol Abdhur, likewise called the Butcher. I am lord and master of this den of untrammeled inequity. No man so much as spits in Bab-El-Shaithan without Skol Abdhur's leave. You do well, barbarian, to remember that.
And he's got a couple of big Kushite dudes standing to either side of him, this big, bare-chested, muscly bodyguards. And Abdhur calls out to have the corpse of this Hyperborean carried away. And it takes 3 guys to do it. One guy holding an arm each, one guy on each arm, and then the third guy holding the dude's legs. It's very reminiscent if you've ever seen the first G.I. Joe miniseries, The Mass Device. There's this great big Conan-looking dude that Duke has to fight when he is a prisoner of Cobra. And while this guy doesn't look like the dude from this G.I. Joe cartoon, he's as big as that dude was. I mean, just in this one panel where they're trying to carry him away, he is twice as tall as anybody else in the room. And I know that I talked about the Hyperboreans when we looked at the first 7 issues of the Dark Horse run, because Hyperborea really played a big role in that. And we did have Hyperboreans in the 3rd issue of Conan the Barbarian, the Marvel series that we're reading now. But those Hyperboreans didn't look any different than anybody else. They were just dudes. And I'd made a big deal out of the fact that the Hyperboreans in Kurt Busiek's Dark Horse run, those first 7 issues, were practically alien looking compared to the Hyperboreans in that 3rd issue of the Marvel run. And so I looked up a bunch of information about the Hyperboreans, and a lot of what I found dealt with their physical attributes and how they were, most of them, I guess, were supposed to be really big, tall, giant men. And this guy is certainly one of those. But Abdhur tells Conan that he can have a seat, get himself some food. He can tell that Conan has a bunch of questions, and he's going to answer them. In fact, I like the way he says it. And it's also when he tells Conan to sit down, he calls him barbarian. And Roy really makes it a point every single time in practically every issue when Conan meets somebody new, they refer to him as barbarian or long mane or long hair or whatever. And Conan always has to tell them, my name is Conan. And sometimes he will continue with, I am a Cimmerian. And so here, this one panel exchange between Conan and Skol Abdhur, the guy says,
Have a seat, barbarian. My name is Conan, and I'll give you answers for the questions that dance naked in your eyes.
That is a great line. The questions that dance naked in your eyes. That's great. I love that. That's a nice bit of writing there from old Roy. That actually makes me think that, one of the things I do, we've talked about this. There's a book, 3 volumes of a book called Barbarian Life, the literary biography of Conan the Barbarian, written by Roy Thomas. And it's just his thoughts, his information, what he remembers about each one of these issues for like the first, 50 or so issues, 50, 60 issues of this Marvel run. And for some of these issues, he has a lot to say. There's a lot of really good information. And when he has a lot of information, it is its own segment here in the show. But this is another issue, just like the previous issue, where he didn't have a lot to say. But he does explain that while technically, as far as the publishing order of this series, this is John Buscema's third issue. I think he did. Yeah, Barry left after issue 24. So John Buscema came aboard with issue 25. So he's done 25, 26, and this with 27 would be his third issue in order of publication. But it was actually the first Conan issue that he drew. And apparently when Barry told Roy that he was leaving again, it was a bit up in the air as far as when he was going to leave. So when John Buscema was offered the job to take over for Barry, Barry still had an issue or two to pencil. And so because they were still in the middle of the War of the Tarim, big story arc, epic storyline thing that was going on, and because Roy wasn't sure which issue would be Barry's last issue and where they would be in this storyline when Barry actually left, and because he wanted to get Buscema started right away, he knew that he was going to do this story after the War of the Tarim, and so he assigned this story to John Buscema as his first issue to draw. And of course, it allowed them to have this issue in the can ready ahead of time. But Conan sits down to eat, and Skol Abdhur tells him the story of how he is able to hold sway over all of these outlaws and bandits and murderers and bad men, basically. And he reaches into his pants and he pulls out this big ruby, holds it out to Conan and says,
"Behold, Cimmerian, the matchless ruby, which the world calls the Blood of Bel-Hissar."
And Conan's like, "Boo?" Because he recognizes the name. He's heard of this ruby before. The narration refers to it as the fabled jewel of jewels. And Suan is also boo, because she's heard of it as well. And even Turgle kind of stirs and he's like, "Whoa, look at that." And all of the men in the room, they're all like craning their necks to get a look at it. And so Abdhur showing him this jewel, showing Conan this ruby, he tells this story about how the ruby was found. Very, very long ago, maybe even before Kol became king, the ruler of Acheron, which I think is a city. I recognize the name. It's part of, if you've read the Robert E. Howard Conan, they refer to it as a novel. It's the longest story, Conan story he's written. It's a novel-length story called The Hour of the Dragon. The bad guy in that is a wizard who had been in a sleep state for thousands and thousands of years. And he was once a mighty wizard that practically ruled the world. And he was from this place called Acheron, which based on that story made me feel like at that time, Acheron was where all the bad guys lived, basically. But Bel-Hissar, the ruler of Acheron, he's on his boat, his ship, his galley. And there is a dude named Naka, who is a pearl diver, who climbs aboard the galley after diving down for some pearls. And he's got this frickin' ruby in his hand. He tells him that he dove very deeply and he found a city on the ocean floor. He found he said it was a mummied king carved huge upon a jade throne, which it's a big giant of a man, like 4 times the size of this diver. So, he says a mummied king makes me think that it was a real person that has been mummified. But then he says it was carved huge upon a jade throne. So I'm assuming what that means is this is a statue of some long dead king whose mummified corpse is probably in a crypt within this giant statue, possibly the big jade throne that the statue is sitting on. But in this statue's hand is this jewel, this ruby. And the guy Naka takes it, swims back up to the surface, climbs aboard the king's galley, tells his story, hands the ruby over to the king, and then dies.
Oh, he died!
The king, Bel-Hissar, all of his people, all of his advisors and whatnot, they beg him to throw the ruby back into the ocean. The fact that Naka died the way he did like that, they feel that the ruby is cursed and Bel-Hissar should be rid of it. But the king, of course, being a king, is like, no way, man. This ruby's mine. And then not long afterwards, back in Acheron, a thief creeps into the palace, kills the king, steals the gem. And then there's this history of this ruby changing hands through death. Somebody has the ruby, somebody kills the person with the ruby, they take the ruby, and then not long after, they are killed for the ruby, and so on and so on and so on. Well, it's come to Skol Abdhur. He took it after killing a Himalayan chieftain, took the ruby from that guy, and now he uses it to keep all these bandits and murderers and bad men. He uses it to keep them all in line. And the way he puts it is that they know that he has it, and if any of them were to kill him and take it, the others would kill that person so that they could get the ruby. And this just makes no sense to me at all. It's basically, it's like the Hyborian Age version of what's it called? Mutually assured destruction, where, during the Cold War, the United States had a big stockpile of nuclear bombs. And then the Soviet Union had what we assumed was also a big stockpile. And we wouldn't launch any kind of attack against them for fear that they would launch their nukes at us, and vice versa. So the fear ultimately of the world coming to an end is what kept the United States and the Soviets from going to war against each other. And so this is kind of the Hyborian Age version of that, just within this fortress. But why is it that if one of these random bandits were to roll up onto old Skol Abdhur and kill him and steal the ruby, why would the other bandits at that point go, all right, let's kill this guy now so we can try to take the ruby? Why is it that I'm trying to explain this. It's so clear in my head. If they won't kill Skol Abdhur to take the ruby because they know that, each one of them have this fear in their hearts that if I was one of those bandits, I'd be like, I want that ruby, but if I steal it, if I kill the guy and steal it, then everybody will want to kill me and steal the ruby from me. But yet, why wouldn't the status quo just remain the same? If I was a bandit there and I kill Skol Abdhur and I take the ruby, then wouldn't the rest of them go, oh, I want that ruby, but if I kill Big Steve, then somebody's going to want to kill me? I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense. It's like he has lorded over these bandits for however long in this fortress because he has this ruby, because every individual bandit is afraid to kill him and steal it because they know that once they do that, then every other guy in the frickin' fortress will come after him. So why is it that at that point, nobody is afraid? Nobody would be afraid of stealing the jewel. I don't know. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I kind of scratched my head at that point.
It's weird. That is weird. You're right.
I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But Conan and Siwan, they hear the story and then they have some food. Conan does some drinking and some feasting, and they go back to their chamber that they've been given, the bed chamber that he is sharing with Siwan. And then Conan shuts the door, bars the door, and immediately starts putting the moves on her. He tells her,
I've looked into those dark Khitan eyes across a table all night. It's time I saw them up close.
He takes a hold of her, leans her back as he goes in for a kiss. She tells him,
then do so.
And so he does. He kisses her. I think I said in the synopsis that he passed out before he could so much as kiss her. But he does. He kisses her, and then suddenly he gets all dizzy and tired. And he says,
Crom and Mitra, am I getting old before my time? Can't seem to keep my eyes open.
And then there's these 3 panels. It's a really nice sequence. Just these 3 panels in a row of Conan trying to use Siwan to hold himself up. But as each panel progresses, he is, of course, falling to the ground. And as he's doing so, he's saying,
don't just stand there, girl. Help me.
And then he passes out. He wakes up. He's alone. But then some dude comes creeping in, dressed kind of like Hercules in the 80s Marvel comics when Hercules was a member of the Avengers that John Buscema penciled. He's got these, not a shirt, just kind of a upper torso set of straps that he wears across his back and chest, and a green skirt. Hercules didn't wear a skirt, but he had those chest straps, and I think his little shorts were green. But anyway, this dude is creeping up to Conan. He's got a knife in his hand. He's getting ready to kill Conan, and Conan, of course, wakes up just in time.
Oh, you are so on that things have now become very much like Donkey Kong.
And he grabs the dude's wrist as he's bringing the knife down toward Conan's chest, and he reverses the attack and kills the dude instead. And then he goes off in search of Siwan because he's afraid at this point. He doesn't realize that Siwan is the one that drugged him. He assumed that Skol Abdhur drugged him. I mean, this dude that tried to kill him, Conan recognizes him as one of Qadra Mahmed's men, but he thinks this is all the work of Skol Abdhur, that he drugged Conan and that he's got Siwan right now and he's doing all kinds of nasty things to her. So he goes running to Abdhur's chambers, bursts in, finds both of his bodyguards dead, stabbed from behind, and then he finds the butcher himself dead, lying across his bed, and the ruby is gone. It's at that point that all the bandits come rushing into the room. They see what's happened. They assume Conan took the ruby from Skol Abdhur, that he's the one that killed him. And Kai Shah, the leader of the other faction, tells his men to search the barbarian, that he has to have the ruby. And Conan's response is great. I love his response.
Step forward, dog, and you'll learn what real blood looks like.
And then Conan gets ready. He gets ready to throw down. It's one of the things I like about Conan is that, A, he's not a coward in any way. He's never worried. Conan is unarmed. He's not wearing armor. He just basically has boots and a little skirt on. And here are like 20 or 30 armed men ready to kill Conan. And Conan does not care. He's like the honey badger that way.
Honey badger don't care.
Conan is more than willing to die because he's not going to go down without a fight. He's not going to give up. He's not going to surrender. He's not going to just let them search him. He's not just going to let them kill him. And so he's ready to throw down.
Never give up. Never surrender.
But before the fight can commence, some dude comes running in and he shouts out,
Masters, the gods of the dark places.
Which apparently means something to these people because they're all like, oh, okay. And they all follow him out of the room and Conan goes with him. And they go down into through a door, a forbidden door, a door that only Skol Abdhur has used. And they go into the bowels of the fortress. And they go into this big room, this big like amphitheater-sized room, this stadium-sized room with very high ceilings. And there are statues, giant, huge Statue of Liberty-sized statues of strange, bestial gods from elder times.
Scary, scary. Don't we look mean?
And it's in there that they find a dude dead on the floor. And he is one of Kai Shah's men. So stretch your mind back just a couple of pages previous. The guy that tried to kill Conan was one of Qadra Mahmed's men. And here we see one of Kai Shah's men dead. So that's two men dead, one from each faction. Each group starts to blame the other when suddenly Siwan is there. She yells out to them that it was Conan. Conan's the one that did it. He's the one that killed Skol Abdhur. He's the one that stole the blood of Bel-Hissar. And she starts urging the men,
slay him, I tell you, slay the outsider.
One single guy out of this whole group, he's the one that decides, all right, I'm going to be the one to kill Conan. Rushes up to Conan with a scimitar in his hand and a shield on his arm. Conan, of course, immediately gets the best of this guy, reverses his sword and kills him, and then steals the scimitar from him, and then just starts fighting all these dudes. There's this one panel where Conan is just surrounded by men. It's just a big mass of bodies around Conan, and he's swinging his scimitar, and like you see a dude's shield that's just all kinds of torn up. There's just debris and shit flying all over the place as Conan is just hacking and slashing like a frickin' Wolverine, some kind of frickin' whirly blade thing, you know, it's just killing people. The very next panel is him with gritted teeth, swinging the scimitar, blood dripping off of it. And again, there's pieces of stuff just flying all about. He's killing people in such a frickin' violent, forceful fashion that their clothing and bits of their armor and shields are just flying off in chips and in bits. You know, that's how hard Conan goes.
You're Conan. You're the destroyer.
And so they're kind of backing him up a flight of stairs, and suddenly along the wall, along one side of these stairs, a hidden door opens up and Conan is pulled inside by Turgle. Hither Came Conan will return after these messages.
Greetings, guys and ghouls. I'm the Invisible Dan Colon, and this is The Monsters That Made Us. Join Monster Mike Manzi and I on the last Friday of every month as we celebrate all of the spooktacular characters and films in the Universal Studios classic monster series. From the Phantom of the Opera to The Creature Walks Among Us, we sink our teeth into all the gory details as we dissect the films that gave us some of the most iconic movie monsters of all time. The Monsters That Made Us is brought to you by the Cage Club Podcast Network. For more information, head on over to cageclub.me. That's cageclub.me.
And now back to Hither Came Conan. Turgle manages to get the door closed before any of the bandits can come through. Turgle motions for Conan to follow him. They end up out on the walls of the castle. They leap from the walls where they have a pair of horses waiting for them. And they're a good 10 or 15 feet up. They jump off of these walls and land on the backs of their horses. And I feel sorry for those horses. That's gotta hurt, wouldn't you think? Being a horse.
A horse is a bike that pedals itself.
But they go riding off, and this is where Conan learns the rest of the story. He sees Turgle messing with a pendant on a chain around his neck. And you know those best friend pendants you can get that's like a circle split in half, and your best bud can wear one half and you wear the other half, and you put them together. It says best buds on it or whatever, you know.
Thanks, best bud.
It's basically what he's got. He's got a piece of a medallion, and Conan realizes that the other piece is hanging around Suan's neck. And he realizes that Khitai tradition means that she's not his slave, she is his wife. And it appears that maybe they had planned this together, but in the end, she betrayed Turgle. And that's when Turgle reveals to Conan that he has the ruby, the Blood of Bel-Hissar. We go back into the fortress where Suan is being killed by the bandits violently, and then they all start fighting each other and killing each other.
Brothers, we should be struggling together! We are!
And then the issue ends with Conan riding away. He thinks for a moment about taking the ruby from Turgle, but he decides, nah. And in fact, he says out loud,
Ha! There's many another precious stone waiting on the road back to the lands I know best. That one's probably haunted anyway.
And so he tells Turgle that he's going to go back to what he was doing before they met up, and that was to head off to Argos and the Western Sea. And he rides away, and that's the end of the issue. And it was a pretty fun issue. I mean, you kind of have to remember that this is even though we just came out of what in essence was, a multi-issue storyline, this is the days of one and done stories. Even that multi-issue storyline was made up of a number of one and done story issues that you could read them all separately and enjoy each one by themselves, but then taken as a whole, they tell another big story. Well, just like with network TV, when you're doing 22 to 24 episodes of a show each season, there will be episodes that are part of the overall mythology of the show and move the story forward. And there will be episodes that are just fillers. This was kind of a filler issue, but it was still fun. That doesn't make it, a terrible issue. It was a lot of fun. A lot of questions. I still don't understand how just having the ruby kept the men from killing Skol Abdhur because they were afraid that everybody would kill. It was just dumb. I didn't like that part. And I don't know if that's a Roy Thomas invention or if that comes from the Blood of Bel-Hissar, the Robert E. Howard story. I don't know because, again, I didn't read that story. But we're promised here on the last panel that the next issue is called The Moon of Zimbabwe. And I want to point out real quick before I finish up talking about the issue. On that last page, the first panel on that last page shows the death of Siwan. And it's brutal looking. She's at the bottom of a set of stairs. She's on her stomach. Half of her body is on the steps. The other half is on the floor in front of the steps. Her head is in a very unnatural angle. And there's a guy standing on the steps above her, crouching in that John Buscema way. Very classic John Buscema drawing of this dude. And he's clutching a dagger, bloody dagger in his hand. And there's blood on her back and on the floor, running out from underneath her, which I don't know. I'm amazed that the Comics Code Authority approved just that panel. She's obviously dead. There's blood. I don't know. Interesting stuff. Roy didn't talk about it at all in his book. But before we wrap up this episode, let me say again, I enjoyed this issue and I'm looking forward to getting into the next one. I actually have read issues 28, 29, and 30. I've read them already, but frankly, I don't remember a lot about any of them. So I am looking forward to getting back into them because it's been a week or so since I read them. But before we wrap this episode up, I don't know how long this sucker is going to end up being, but with the way the issue ended, with Conan proclaiming that he is on his way to Argos, I think it's time that we all get out our maps of Hyboria for a new segment that we'll visit every once in a while. It's not going to be a weekly segment or a segment that we're going to see in every episode, but it's a new segment that I'm calling Where's Conan Going? All right, so everybody got their maps?
No.
No?
No.
Yeah, I probably should have explained. There is a link in the show notes that will take you to the map that we're going to be looking at for the episode, or you can go to map.hithercameconan.com. It'll take you to the map. It's actually a map I took off of the site collectededitions.com. It's a site that I've never actually visited before, but according to the site, they are devoted to the discussion of comics collected editions. But back in December of 2018, they did a review of the Conan the Barbarian, the original Marvel Years Omnibus, Volume 1, was a hardcover. And along with the review, they included a number of preview pages because they actually reviewed it before the omnibus was released, and a scan of the map, which was in the omnibus, that was with the preview pages. The map originally was printed in Marvel Treasury Edition number 4, which was a Conan the Barbarian issue. It was 96 pages, sold for $1.50, and it was published on February the 4th, 1975. And then the map was reprinted as part of this omnibus hardcover, which released in January of 2019. The Marvel Treasury Editions, by the way, if you're not aware, these were a series of Marvel comics published from 1974 to 1981. And per Wikipedia, they usually featured reprints of previously published stories, though a few issues contained new material. The series was published in an oversized 10-inch by 14-inch tabloid or treasury format and was launched with a collection of Spider-Man stories. The series concluded with the second Superman and Spider-Man intercompany crossover, and Marvel also published treasuries under the titles Marvel Special Edition and Marvel Treasury Special, as well as a number of one-shots. Anyway, that map, that's what we're going to look at. If you want to follow along, like I said, just pull up the map from the link provided in the show notes or go to map.hithercameconan.com. Go ahead, I'll wait. Get to it. All right then, now that everyone has their maps, this particular map, if you'll notice, shows us Conan's journey from issue 1 to, well, on the map, it goes to issue 24. Basically, the Barry Windsor Smith issues, or the Barry Windsor Smith time on the title, because not all of them were done by Barry Windsor Smith. But technically, you can include issues 25 and 26 on that map as well. with where issue 24 is showing because they all took place in Makkalet.
Makkalet.
But looking at the map, you'll see that Conan begins his journey in Vanaheim. Well, technically, he started out in Cimmerian and traveled north into Vanaheim, but we don't catch up to him until Conan the Barbarian issue number 1, The Coming of Conan. And by that point, he is, of course, already in Vanaheim. It's here that the young Cimmerian, a mercenary, is hired on with a band of Aesir warriors to battle their hated enemy, the Vannermen of Vanaheim. He's also captured by winged demons and mixes it up, sort of, with Skarkosh the shaman. Conan, by the way, is just 20 years old at this point, and he is, quote,
fresh from his first taste of battle at Venarium.
From Vanaheim, he travels west into Asgard, where in Conan the Barbarian number 2, Lair of the Beastmen, he is captured by a pair of giant beastmen, lured into their clutches by a half-naked babe. You've ever seen Return of the Jedi, there's the moment where they're out there on the forest moon of Endor and they're looking for Princess Leia, and suddenly Chewbacca senses something and he goes rushing off toward it, and they're all like, what, Chewie, what? And they follow him, and it's like a dead animal hanging from a tree. Chewie goes to grab it, and it's a trap, and they're all captured in these nets hanging from trees, and Han Solo says, great.
Great, Chewie. Great. Always thinking with your stomach.
And that's what I think about with this second issue. It seems like Conan is often lured into trouble because of a half-naked babe. So, great, Conan. Always thinking with your pee-pee.
Since you saw her boobies, I think you're going to have to show her your pee-pee.
Conan then heads south, and by issue number 3, The Twilight of the Grim Grey God, he finds himself in the middle of a war between Brithunia and Hyperborea. Issue 4 finds Conan even further south in the country of Zamora, where he encounters the strange elephant-headed alien, Yag Kosha, in the Tower of the Elephant. He travels east through Zamora in Conan the Barbarian number 5, Zukala's Daughter, and by issue 6, Devil Wings over Shadazar, the Cimmerian fights a giant bat above the streets of Shadazar. Conan continues east at this point, passing through Corinthia, and when we get to Conan the Barbarian number 7, The Lurker Within, Conan is in Nemedia, where he encounters the god in the bowl. From there, Conan heads south again, crossing back into Corinthia, where, in Conan the Barbarian number 8, The Keepers of the Crypt, he meets Captain Bergen from Gunderland, and the two attempt to steal from the lost city of Lanzhou. Don't worry, I'm getting somewhere, and we are getting there right now, because it's in this issue just before Conan and Bergen enter the treasure room of the Great Temple in the lost city of Lanzhou that Conan tells his companion,
if there's neither gold nor water within, I'm off for Argos and the sea.
So yeah, I point that out for a reason, but we'll get there in a bit. Just know that Argos is on the west coast. Anyway, following issue 8, Conan remains in Corinthia all throughout the events of issue 9, The Garden of Fear, issue 10, Beware the Wrath of Anu, and issue 11, Rogues in the House, all while traveling southeast. In fact, it's at the end of issue 11 that Conan is asked, basically, where he's off to now. And Conan answers,
I'm still bound for Argos and the sea.
Now, as I said, Argos is on the west coast. And yet, for a guy who is still bound for Argos, well, he's been spending a lot of time heading in the opposite direction over the last 3 issues. But certainly, now he's going to start moving west, right?
That's a good question, and the answer is yes.
No, he doesn't. In fact, if you look at the map, he continues moving east. All throughout the events of issue 12, The Dweller in the Dark, issue 13, Web of the Spider God, issue 14, A Sword Called Stormbringer, and issue 15, The Green Empress of Melnibone, Conan continues his steady trek in an unmistakable easterly direction. By the way, the next issue, number 16, The Frost Giant's Daughter, that is a tale from Conan's past, set sometime before issue 1. But it's not accounted for at all on the map, which I think is a bit weird. I mean, there's a bit there in the upper left of the map in which Roy tells us,
issue number 16, The Frost Giant's Daughter, has been omitted because it was published out of regular sequence. Ditto number 22, a reprint of number 1.
Not including issue number 22 on the map makes sense. Like Roy said, it's a reprint of issue number 1, so it's technically already accounted for on the map. But why omit issue number 16?
I don't know. Don't ask me.
I'm assuming since Roy and Barry had agreed to tell Conan's story in chronological order, that some readers, seeing issue 16 show up on the map north in Vanaheim, that they might get confused. You know, wondering how Conan got from Yagala and Koth by the end of issue 15 to the north in Vanaheim for issue 16, then back south to the Viliet Sea in issue 17. But you know what? That doesn't make sense either. Wouldn't those same people be just as confused when they were reading issues 15, 16, and then 17? I don't know. It just seems dumb to me, you know, not to include it. I don't understand it.
No one cares.
Anyway, following the events of issue 15, the second of the two-parter in which Conan teams up with Elric of Melnibone, Conan continues east, showing up on a ship in the middle of the Viliet Sea in issue number 17, The Gods of Balsagoth. He ends up on the island of Balsagoth before the issue ends and remains there until the end of issue 18, The Thing in the Temple, where he's pulled onto the ship of Prince Yezdegerd, which, guess what, is heading east. Now, at this point, I really can't fault Conan for his easterly direction, considering that he's basically given the choice to either join Yezdegerd's army or get dropped back into the sea. So yeah, from the end of issue 18 and all throughout issues 19 through 26, he's been roped into this whole War of the Tarim thing. With this issue, however, issue number 27, it appears that Conan is finally back on track. Granted, he's moving south, but he can't really start going west because, well, the Viliet Sea is right there and he's got to go around it. But I don't know. I just find it super weird that way back in issue number 8, Conan drops the idea of going west to Argos, yet goes east instead. Then in issue 12, rather than just throwing out the idea like he did in issue 8, he says he's going to Argos. Not only does he say that he's going to Argos, but he says that he's still bound for Argos, which to me implies that he's been traveling west. But we know he's been going east. So yeah, what's up with that? What did he mean when he said he was still bound for Argos? Did he lose all sense of direction? Or was he saying like, dude, I'm trying to get to Argos. That's where I want to go, but damn, shit just keeps popping up that pushes me east. I don't know. I mean, he was going west. From issue 4, he started moving in a southwestern direction, moving further south and west until the end of issue 6. At that point, he goes straight west through Corinthia and into Nemedia. He then goes south for issue 8, which makes sense. I mean, first off, he's on the run. He'd stolen something from a house of relics in Nemedia, or at least he's being accused of stealing something. I don't think he actually escaped from the whole God and the Bull thing with anything valuable, but still, he's on the run, so he heads south. Why he heads east at that point, though, I really don't know. Did Roy just forget that Conan was supposed to be going to Argos? I'll say it again, I don't know. I just think it's weird.
What? What's so weird?
Regardless, he finally seems to be back on track. I feel like I made a big deal out of this when we talked about issue number 12, I think it was. Is that what I said? Yeah, issue 12, or maybe starting with issue 13, because, you know, he said at the end of issue 12 he was going to go to Argos, and then by 13 he's going east. So I know I made a big deal out of it back then, but it's good to see that Conan appears to be back on track. And that was, where's Conan going? What'd you think? Did you like the segment?
Not really, no.
You know, one of the things I enjoy about reading stuff that is set on another world or in a fantasy setting, stories that don't just take place in one general location. I love the whole geography aspect of it all. I like to be able to look at a map and follow the character's path, see how far they've traveled, you know? And if you look at his path, he kind of seems to kind of go back and forth a lot. But I do think every once in a while, maybe every 6 issues or so, I want to pull that map out and just kind of talk about his progress, especially when his progress seems to go in the opposite direction from where he had said he was going. I gotta point that out when that kind of stuff comes up.
Would you let it go already? You're fine.
But yeah, for now, that is all I have to say about Conan, his trek through the lands of the Hyborian Age, and issue number 27. What about y'all? Did you like the issue? What were some of your favorite bits? If there's anything you'd like to add, let me know. Feedback at hithercameconan.com.
Everybody out!
Next time on Hither Came Conan, our titular barbarian tussles with a great big old snake lizard, falls into a patch of quicksand, and eventually throws down with a hulking golden ape. Will Conan survive?
That's a good question, and the answer is yes.
Well, yeah, of course he will. What kind of question is that? The question you should be asking is, how does he defeat the golden ape and the great big old snake lizard?
The answer is yes.
Let's find out together on the next episode when I take a look at Conan the Barbarian number 28, Moon of Zimbabwe, and that's from April of 1973. The synopsis used in this episode was taken from MarvelFandom.com with alterations by the host of Hither Came Conan, and that's me.
Steeven is my name.
The information used in this episode comes from Mike's Amazing World of Comics at Mike'sAmazingWorld.com, and the book Barbarian Life, a literary biography of Conan the Barbarian, Volume 1 by Roy Thomas, which you can get along with Volumes 2 and 3 at CimmerianPress.com. And finally, the views and opinions expressed within this episode are mine and mine alone, and do not reflect the official policy or position of Conan, his sword, his steely thews, and especially not his god, Crom.
Crom laughs with your 4 wins.
And with that, folks, it's time to let you go. I have things to do, food to eat, comics to read, shows to watch, toilets to, well, you know. So until next time, keep your swords close by, never stop treading them jeweled thrones, and as always, be nice to each other. Bye. I want to thank you for listening to this episode of Hither Came Conan. Questions and comments can be directed to feedback at hithercameconan.com. If you enjoyed the show, you can help to boost our presence online by leaving a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. I also invite you to join our subscription program, Steeven or Else Beyond. And in return, you'll get episodes of Hither Came Conan along with every other podcast under the Steeven or Else Media umbrella, early and ad-free. You can subscribe to Steeven or Else Beyond through Apple Podcasts, Patreon, or Substack. Check out the link in the show notes, or just go to hithercameconan.com to choose the option that's best for you. Hither Came Conan is a presentation of Steeven or Else Media. For more nerdy content hosted by me, check out steevenorelse.com.
Many wars and feuds did Conan fight. Honor and fear were heaped upon his name. In time, he became a king by his own hand. This story shall also be told.
Prince Yezdegerd, however, despite winning the war and recovering the livering, as our story begins, Conan is traveling west in the empty Hyrkanian plains south of the Zaporoska River. Zaporoska. Conan leaps from the saddle, tackling the large assailant and pulling him into the river so he can look for gold and maybe one of them rings that makes him invisible. There's a little Lord of the Rings reference for you there, folks. Crossing stories. I don't know. The colossal Khitan who leads our hero. The colossal Khitan who leads our farted head. Farting all the time. She tells Conan and his appointment. I'd like to make an appointment with my opponent, please, for a sword fight. In the middle of a hard-panned, extra dry. The big wide wall, the Khitan man that is, or was Conan's appointment. I almost said it again. That was Conan's, Jesus Christ, the third time. Appointment, opponent.
just don't think I can move through life knowing that a guy named Steeven did this to me.
How could you let this happen, Steeven?
Your podcast sucks.
Enough talk.